Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Alexis Badenmare. I'm the Political Director of the Organic Consumers Association. And today I am joined by the Midwest Healthy Ag team. Ann Wolf serves as the co-director for Midwest Healthy Ag. She has a master's degree in philanthropy and nonprofit development and owns and manages a 300-acre farm in Iowa. Rob Wallace is an evolutionary epidemiologist and co-director for research at Midwest Healthy Ag. Luis Fernando Chavez is a disease ecologist and works with the Gorgas Memorial Health Research Institute in Panama. Luke Bergman is a geographer and associate professor at the University of British Columbia. And today we are discussing a new publication from the Midwest Healthy Ag team. It's published in The Land, and it is called Mapping Agricultural Lands from Conventional to Regenerative. So we're going to have a roundtable discussion about this new paper. I'll let Rob introduce the whole project, and Anne as well, because they're the directors of the project, and then Luke and Louise are the researchers. So we'll let Rob and Anne tell us what was the seed of this paper?
Sure, if it's all right, Ann, I'll begin, if it's okay. Let's just say that Midwest Healthy Ag is a research program that was put together by Regeneration Midwest and the Agroecology and Rural Economics Research Corps. Regeneration Midwest is a group of farmers and food activists interested in moving Midwest agriculture in more regenerative direction. The Agroecology Rural Economics Research Corps is a group of independent scientists who are interested in helping out farmers and other community groups on their research needs. And so a couple of years ago, we applied for a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to look at how agriculture impacts population health and climate change. And so we set up a study. It's what's called a multi-level study. We're looking at this issue at two different levels. The first level is to look at how agriculture is distributed across the Midwest. And that seems like an obvious thing, but it's not necessarily something that's been really done, particularly at the county level. There are 1,055 Midwest counties. And so there's a lot of work to be done in terms of figuring out what kind of agriculture is being pursued where. The second level of the study involves picking a couple counties for 6 Midwest states. And the states we ended up choosing are Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, and is that 6 there? I can't remember if I counted all right. But we want to choose 2 counties in each of those states and interview farmers there. And the 2 counties would be one county more on the kind of conventional end of production and one county more in regenerative end of the production. And we ended up over the last 2 years interviewing 96 farmers and following up with focus groups across communities, including religious leaders, including women farmers, including BIPOC farmers. So to get a complete picture of how agriculture might be impacting health and climate change. And so this land paper is specifically about that first level. How is agriculture distributed across the Midwest? Anne?
I would say, Rob, that sums it up quite well. And I think when we have the opportunity to pull in Luis and Luke in how they structured and went about the information that they gathered to put in the land paper, that in and of itself, the methodology and the process itself is extremely fascinating and very in-depth, and was a wealth of information that we could, drop into the land paper to support the findings that we have so far in what we are calling our phase 1 concept for this particular program, a grant-funded program.
All right, let's hear from Luke and Louise then. I'll have each one of you tell the audience, I guess, the most surprising finding, what you did not anticipate, something that you think is unique to your findings in your research. Luke, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. It's just a pleasure to be with you here today. I suppose that the thing that I was hoping to find, or wasn't sure whether we would find or not, but was gratified to see that it did come out at the end of the analysis, was that there really is a diversity of agricultural practice and agricultural systems throughout this larger Midwest. So we tried to pick measures to characterize the landscape, measures that would make sense in a variety of different parts of the Midwest. So we tried to create an index that would work for everywhere, but at the same time, we were hoping that that index would differentiate places and let us see a bit of the character of the Great Plains versus the woodlands versus the Great Lakes sorts of regions. And indeed, that's what happened. We found that as we constructed a way of understanding these different counties and their agricultural practices quantitatively by combining all sorts of different ways of quantifying agriculture, we found that different regions had different characters to them and that we could begin to describe those. And it's not a simple story of one part of the Midwest being far more regenerative than others. There are regenerative regions that whose agricultural practices have really interesting forms of regenerative character that are throughout the Midwest. And so finding all of those different regions that perhaps people could learn from as they're seeking to shift their own practices, things that are closer to home, was really gratifying. So we also displayed this graphically in a series of maps that you all might find interesting if you have a chance to take a look.
Very cool. I will look for those maps. I'll try to get them up on my screen in a moment. But I have a follow-up question based on what you said, Luke, and it can go to any of the panelists. In the Obama administration, oh, here we go. Thank you, Corey. Corey Melby is working behind the scenes to make this all good. And so so actually, why don't we have, before I get to my questions, since we've just put the map up, Luis, tell us what we're looking at. We have to unmute Luis.
Yeah,
okay, there we go.
Okay, so here what we see is the index map, and basically we have a color scale, and then the darker we see is what we find, or what we found as most regenerative counties. The lighter colors represents counties that are more into the conventional agriculture, and then it's just a simple way like to see the things, no? Like, for example, if we see most of northern Michigan is into the regenerative, actually most of Michigan is, but for example, if we go to Kansas down there, we see it's more into the conventional agriculture. So this is a first snapshot, but as Luke said, the history gets more complicated, no? Because we have different kinds of regenerative, different kinds of conventional, and that's presented in some other maps also in the paper and on the accompanying website, where the maps are available for people to download and to play with them.
Great, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So, the pale colors, the light greens that are sort of in between the dark green and the white, that's where we see a huge diversity of types of farms. And so I want to ask you all about that. In the Obama administration, there were huge controversies over GMOs, the impact that GMOs would have on organic. Now, I'm sure that's still a controversy today, but the administration actually said that they wanted to deal with that at the time. And Secretary Vilsack, who is again secretary now under the Biden administration, Secretary Tom Vilsack used the word coexistence. He said that he wanted to foster coexistence between conventional agriculture and organic agriculture. And of course, this is challenging for organic farms who deal with pesticide drift, who deal with pollution of water resources from factory farms, that deal with genetic drift of GMOs. So how does I'm not going to ask you to weigh in with your opinions on those things. I've certainly got my own strong opinions, and we may get opinions from folks who are watching, which I would definitely like to hear from. But just in terms of what you're seeing, are organic and GMO, pesticide-free and pesticide-using, factory farms that have all of their animals indoors, and farms that are using grazing, are we seeing this mixed up? And what does your research tell us about coexistence in agriculture, the challenges or places where it's not so much of a challenge?
Well, if you like, if it's okay if I start here, just to say that, we have strong opinions about this as well, all this as well. But to say that, if we are in the business of trying to move an entire region in which some of the states are larger than whole countries elsewhere, and we have to take a really broad 30,000-foot view of how to go about making this shift. As we all know, the Midwest is very much a center of industrial agriculture, exporting food around the world, often to the great damage to many counties. A lot of, as you brought up, pesticide drift, water contamination, destruction of soils. And so in part, that's why the general move toward a regenerative production would be, in our view, the way to go. However, it's, as you brought up, there's all these complexities involved, in that you can find so-called conventional counties in which farmers are very interested in engaging in kind of minimalist regenerative practices, starting off with cover crops and things that would in low tillage, as a way of beginning to protect the soils in a way that allows for a move toward a direction of better practices that would hopefully reduce the amount of soil that's destroyed. On the other hand, we have in regenerative counties people who do use pesticides. And when we speak about regenerative county or conventional county, it doesn't mean that everybody in that county does conventional practices, or everybody in that county does conventional county does conventional practices. So there's all sorts of combinations going on. Whole areas are very complex. Even small counties can be sites of very complex agroecologies in which people are making all sorts of decisions based on their connection to the land, or also their connection to their pocketbook, how to pay, their mortgage payments in the next season. So these issues are very complex. And so over the course of doing this research, we've kind of moved in the direction of that these kinds of conversations need to be had across both regenerative farmers and conventional farmers in a way that things are a lot more complex. It's not in these two bins of, everybody does regenerative practices. And there's all sorts of kind of regenerative practices. There's the minimalist ones I talked about, low tillage and cover crops, but there are also other practices. And our view of regenerative ag, and we try to include in this index, extends to how farmers are producing foods as far as the relationship to the greater community. Are they producing foods that are consumed locally? Are they producing food for export? And so there is what we term a kind of a maximalist regenerative practice, meaning a kind of high-end regenerative practice in which some farmers are engaged in kind of full regenerative practice of not only treating their land well, but producing nutritious food, but also selling their goods in local areas. So the question you brought up is fundamental toward any efforts toward moving us in a direction in which we can have the Midwest on a more healthy agriculture that is able to feed the region, and also do so in a way that can allow us to socially reproduce and produce food within the next few generations, rather than producing food in a way that strips the land of its capacity to reproduce and produce food.
Great, thank you, Rob. Luke, do you want to weigh in on the coexistence issue?
Sure. We have some empirical results here on the map too that show regions where you have both more regenerative farming alongside more conventional farming. So we divided sorry, getting a little echo there. All right, back, great. We divided the landscape up using some quantitative techniques to try to figure out which counties were more like which other counties in terms of the types of agricultural practices that they carried out. And we found that in this map you're looking at here, each of the different colors, counties that are colored the same way are more similar to each other than they are to the other counties that are colored differently. So we found that there are some regions that have a bit more of this coexistence that you're talking about, and other regions that are characterized by more either regenerative farming or more conventional farming. So, for example, the pink region in the map you're looking at right there, the area in between the Missouri River and then the Red River, say, up between Minnesota and North Dakota, that pink region, has there are a number of farms in that region that are applying a variety of pesticides, but at the same time, there's a lot of other farms in that region that are relatively regenerative, or perhaps even sometimes that's the same farm. We can't say from our data at this level of the study. That would have to be the other study that Rob was talking about, the other level of the study where people go in and talk with farmers, or we have farmers on the team, so but this level is not that analysis. So places like the pink region have more of that coexistence going on. There's other regions like the gray area where there is actually, sorry, let me say the blue region has a lot more conventional work, and a lot of the blue is covered by the other half of that, the other graph down there below. But you can see it in you can see it in the Missouri River Valley up in North Dakota, and you can also see it. It's parts of the high plains in Kansas and Nebraska have a good deal of the blue region, and the blue region is much more of what we identified at least to be a conventional sort of agricultural region. But there are there are pockets within each of these that operate differently, and so we offer a variety of different ways of looking at this, and some of them match up with the others, and some of them just characterize a bit of the diversity and complexity to the story that's available. So the other point about coexistence is we're looking at the whole Midwest, and so yes, you can have pollen drift a good ways, but if we're showing you a county by county analysis is you can have a fairly regenerative county right next to a fairly conventional county, and is that coexistence or is that separation? It's kind of a question of what scale you're looking at, and we were looking at the county and broader scale here. So thank you. On to Rob. Or another question, my bad.
And Louise and Anne, how about Louise? Yeah. Would you like to weigh in on what your study tells us about how farmers are coexisting, the organic to conventional range, and how well farmers are situated to be able to maximize their production?
Well, just as Luke mentioned, and I mean, as it was the idea of this second map, no, you have different kinds of regenerative and different kinds of conventional. No, what's specific to each kind varies from region to region. And then again, like the other big point about the methodology of making the maps is like it doesn't necessarily need to be like GMOs or specific pesticides. No, it's like the full model. No, like either using a GMO or using a pesticide, ends up being a conventional practice, no? And that's tied to a lot of other things that make a difference for the living of the farmer, and actually also for the health of the community living next to the farm, for the people that eat whatever is produced in the farm. And again, in that sense, I think when we did the research, we were very careful to consider all of this when producing that map, when getting that scale, and the scales that you saw both in the first map and the different clusters that Luke was going into detail, no? I think it's interesting, or one of the problems, or I mean, there might be some problems with this idea of coexistence, but again, so those are things that probably are not so expressed in the map. That's the other part of the research that we want to do, and I don't know, probably Rob and Anna are the best equipped to talk a little bit more about that.
Just briefly to say that, we take the view that all farmers are doing important work, and wherever they are on that scale there. And our project's about listening and learning from farmers. That's the interview end of our project. But it's important to try to encourage farmers wherever they are on that continuum to move in the direction of more regenerative practices. It's wonderful that conventional farmers are doing the kind of minimalist regenerative stuff to start off with. But in the end, of course, we think that that's not enough. We're not interested, at least my personal view is, I don't think regenerative ag should be about merely serving as kind of greenwashing for agribusiness. I do think there has to be much more of a notion of locus of control, meaning that local communities make the decisions about what happens in terms of their farms and more broadly across the farming landscape. Farming isn't just about what you do from your farm gate to your barn. It's very much about the broader ecological landscape. Is there clean water running through your land? Is the soil healthy beyond merely the farm gate? And all these things are something that requires the community to intervene. And the agribusiness model, in my view, largely kind of separates farmers out and cuts them up into individuals in a way that to the detriment of communities. And so whatever community, I mean, we've come across counties that are more conventional, but they're organized. And so, you have farmers in so-called conventional counties who are doing conventional production and are starting to do more regenerative practices, in part because they are linking up with community members who are concerned about the health of their local rivers. And so this is the kind of thing, and in a time in which there's terrible things happening in terms of climate change, in terms of the amount of soil fertility, in terms of the water table across the Midwest. There are some remarkable bright spots in terms of consciousness across communities in terms of moving in more of regenerative direction. So this is why we've taken a much broader view about what counts as a good trajectories. And so if there are regenerative communities and counties that are, going full bore in terms of local sales and CSAs, that's absolutely wonderful. But we also think it's a good sign when conventional so-called conventional counties are starting to move in more regenerative direction too, and that should be supported and encouraged.
Definitely. I'm going to take a question from the audience from Natalie Duncan. But before I do that, Anne, do you have anything that you want to say on the issue of coexistence and how your mapping might help farmers figure out, what is going to be most profitable and successful in their region, given the character of the area?
Well, in all honesty, I can safely feel like I can only speak for myself as a farmer and a farm landowner. And as Rob mentioned, there's, every farm is unique and different. And a lot of it has to do with the geography of what you are capable of farming on that land, what your interests might be as far as a commodity, whether it's cattle, sheep, poultry, whatever it might be, pigs, whatever your interest is. And, you know, around my farm location, way over there in eastern Iowa, farms around my farm, they're just as varied as my farm is. And everyone has their, you know, different perspective of what they want to do. It depends on how much land they own. Most of the farms and the farm owners, at least, you know, again, around my farm, have a full-time job off the farm. And even, you know, if they're farming 800-900 acres, they're still working full-time off the farm somewhere just to make ends meet. Farming, unless you have at least 1,000 acres or higher, isn't profitable really by itself without, you know, some type of government subsidy or, you know, whatever you might need. And all the farmers, I mean, we always look at the bottom line. You know, there's bills to pay, there's taxes to pay. And whatever we do, in whatever capacity we want to do with our farm, you know, we do have to watch that bottom line very carefully. I see a lot of conventional farmers doing regenerative practices, and just like Rob said, and you know, regenerative farms doing some conventional practices. So it's all across the board. And I think what was fascinating for me, although I've been doing agriculture for many years, was to be a part of this study, just to kind of listen to other farmers and hear their stories and what they were doing, and obviously read the volume of information we had in the interviews. And it kind of supports some of my thinking in what I want to do with my farm and how I want it to operate, and what I value. Again, I have a lot of conservation practices on my farm just because of where my farm is located. And, you know, there's always a story that goes along with that. But it's fascinating to hear the stories from other farmers and other practices. And again, it's just a extremely varied landscape. And agriculture in and of itself is extremely complicated and very fast moving. It's never really the same day twice.
Great. Well, I'd like to start with Louise now on answering this question from Natalie Duncan. She says, well, could we, and Corey, if you could bring up the map again, and let's go through all of these, what the colors mean. And so Natalie asks, I see my county is red, but what does that mean? So if you could show us the map and explain. So we've talked about the pesticide heavy region in pink, right? And then Luke was going to tell us, actually, just pick up where where Luke left off, Louise. I think you'll have to unmute, or Corey, you can unmute.
I actually do have an issue that I'm colorblind, so I'm not so sure about what's the red. So I defer to Luke. That I assume it's the one in Nebraska, but I don't know. Luke, please take it.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead, sorry about that.
No worries. Well, I don't know exactly which county you live in, Natalie, but I would love to hear that in the chat. Which state and county would be great. But I can tell you that what the red is on the map that you're looking at, and for reference, that's the cluster 0 on the color that corresponds to the 0 in the upper right hand of the screen. So perhaps that helps a little, Luis. Sorry about that. But those numbers, they're just arbitrary. They don't mean that 0 is better or worse than 3. It's just we didn't name them, so they just have numbers. Sorry about that. The red, what that means is it's a your county has more in common with other red counties according to the things we looked at in this study. So the kinds of things we looked at were on the things that our study came up with that we thought would be more associated with regenerative farming. And this is not as much me as it is the larger team, which includes food system experts, farmers, some academics, students. It's a variety of stakeholders. But so the kinds of things we looked at that we thought would be associated more with regenerative farming were things like how many of the farms practice intensive grazing, how many of the farms are using silvopastoral practices, how about livestock diversity on the farm, how about conservation easements, how about the use of cover crops, how about no-till, how about crop diversity within a single farm? Is the farm growing a variety of types of crops or more just one? And then is the farm selling locally, or is it only selling to great distant to suppliers and intermediaries at greater distances? So those were all things that we thought of as being relatively associated with regenerative practices, more or less. And they were also, as I mentioned before, those are things that many of them you can find echoes of in a variety of parts of the Midwest. So it's not as specific as some things that are really local and regional. So, and then on the other side, the things that we thought of as quite commonly associated with perhaps more conventional production were things like, well, how many types of pesticides does the farm use? How is the agricultural methane emissions in that area? How about the average farm size in the county? Those are, and how far does food flow? How far is it shipped? And also things like PM 2.5, so some other air quality measures. Those were all things that we thought of as being a bit more associated with conventional production, perhaps, at least certain types of values for those. So what red means is that in the combination of all of those possible ways of looking at your county has more common in those respects that I just mentioned with other red counties than it does with perhaps a blue county or a yellow county or a pink county or a purple county, which are all the different regions that are nearby the red region. So now, in particular, what does the red region have? Well, we talk about the red region in the paper on page 13, which I know you don't want to flip and read about right now, but the red region has really high average farm sizes, and it has relatively low livestock diversity, and at the same time, it has really high rates of intensive grazing. So that's a nice combination. It has some direct sales, but it varied a bunch across the red region. And there wasn't as much pesticide use in your region. And there was actually kind of several things going on in the red region in terms of crop diversity. Some farms had a lot of diversity of their crops, and then there were other farms which were not diverse in their cropping practices, or the types of crops they grew, at least, let's say. So, red was an interesting region, and you can compare how it differed from yellow and pink if you'd like. When you just, you can dig in some of the other maps and some of the text we wrote if you'd like. But I hope that speaks to a little bit of both about what your region might have and then also how the larger study operated as well.
Yeah, if I may, what's really wonderful hearing Anne and Luke in terms of the descriptions of what these maps can do is that, we're big fans of like farmer to farmer learning. It's a big deal. We're all about that. That's fantastic. And for us, this is an example of that kind of stuff done at a kind of a larger level across the region. I think the regenerative campaigns have been largely, focused on really micro local areas, which is of course incredibly important work, and we very much support that. But we want to think in terms of like more strategic practices of how do we change the Midwest and move in the right direction. Both regenerative practitioners and conventional practitioners, both areas in which regenerative practices are localized and conventional practices. How do we move the Midwest in a better direction? And these kind of maps kind of get you thinking, well, what's going on in the different parts of the Midwest? What is Ohio doing that's more regenerative? And we can learn stuff that's going on in other counties and other states. And all the counties can serve for each other as models from which we can draw new practices and new ways of doing things. some practices may not be appropriate for some areas. And if you're more in the kind of Great Plains areas, maybe there's not a lot of room to do silvopasture. But we can learn stuff from what's going on in different parts of the region, and these maps are a good entryway. And we don't claim that this is the final answer to things. And as Luke described, the variables we chose to put in our index, another group might go, we want to choose different variables. And in fact, our group ourselves are thinking about, if we were to do this again, how would we do this differently? And so this is just really a doorway into exercising our imaginations in terms of how we can move counties in new directions, and how we can move whole parts of the Midwest in different directions. And so it provides a way in which we can go about doing this. Now, Corey brought up this next map, this set of maps here. And these are our variables across Nebraska. And you can see the livestock diversity on the upper left there. We have silvopasture and the one over, and so on and so forth. And we can see the different counties there have different combinations of these variables in a way that makes things very complex, but at the same time illuminating in terms of thinking through how the counties actually differ from each other. And so, for instance, I mean, I can't read the counties here from these maps, but we can see it's intensive grazing there is very high in the northern and central parts of counties in Nebraska, but they have very low levels of no-till. And overall, Nebraska doesn't have a lot of local direct sales. It might mean that state is largely directed toward export, an export economy, and there's a lot of room to grow, so to speak, for counties, both conventional and regenerative, to move in the direction of more local sales and CSAs and selling to local restaurants and such. So there's room for all sorts of conversations, and we're just opening the door for those. We don't have all the answers. We're interested in talking to people locally in our interviews. And as Ann brought up, these maps can serve as a way to start to have those kind of conversations and pick up on what other parts of the region are doing, and to begin to have that kind of more integrated conversation among farmers and food activists about what way the Midwest can go. Because frankly, right now, largely the story of food has been, in my view, in the hand of the large agribusinesses in the last few decades. And it's time, particularly how that's not worked out very well, it's time that other people begin to get in a position to be able to tell that tale.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to take another question from the audience. Mirella Baez asks, when I go get my produce and ask if it is organic, they say it is grown with no pesticides. Is that enough, or should I make sure it's organic? And I want to tell a story from my own life about this. I was avoiding the farmer who came to my neighborhood because he didn't say he was organic. He said he was pesticide free, or he would have signs up about pesticide free. And so I would go to the next neighborhood over to their market because they had certified organic farmers, and I could see the USDA seal on their stands. And then I got to know the farmer who lived closest to me really well. He's a good friend of mine now. And he said, oh, I just hated using the word organic because I thought it was so bougie and elitist. And I thought that, there are a lot of low-income people in the neighborhood, and I didn't want to make anybody feel like they didn't belong just because it was organic. And so I totally read him wrong, And so I think the answer is obviously it depends. But you all probably have data that you can tell us, like, how many farmers are there in this region? You don't have to give us an exact number, but are you seeing most farmers who don't use pesticides getting certified organic? Or are you seeing a lot of farmers who are not certified but don't use pesticides?
Actually, there is a quick answer for that, and there are plenty of what we can call organic farmers that don't get certified. And part of the reason, some of it is what you mentioned, like, well, they don't see any benefit and it might be exclusionary, have all these problems with the community around them. There are other people that just simply don't trust the system that's behind the certification. And And again, thinking in terms of the regenerative and conventional spectrum that we were studying, actually having no pesticides is a very good sign. That's something that definitely it's a plus, no?
All right, let's keep taking questions because we've got a lot and they're really good. So from Sean, he asks, you talked about plant exudates being the main channel for the transfer of carbon compounds to the soil. One of the things we are told in regenerative agriculture is that you must integrate livestock and manure. Can you do that without livestock and increase soil carbon? Are the plant exudates enough, or do you have to have the livestock component? Dr. Christine Jones says, no, the plant exudates are enough. We are seeing huge improvements in soil with companion planting and multi-species situations. So this kind of, if I'm reading Sean right, this kind of goes to this question of like, can you have veganic agriculture? Or is all agriculture really like that's organic? Is it actually incorporating animals as a source of fertility? But again, I won't ask you to state your opinions on this. Tell us from your research, are you seeing, are there a lot of farms in the region that are not using animals, but are exemplary in terms of regeneration and organic? And if they aren't using animals for fertility, where is their fertility coming from?
I would say that our study does not direct specifically to that question. So I think that's more of kind of a more localized within a county investigation that we have not undertaken. So, but it's an excellent question, and I'm sure there are all sorts of practices of using multiple types of plants together to enrich soil. I think the milpa agriculture of Latin America is an example of that, and there our colleagues in Nebraska are trying to actually bring such practices up there to work with local Latinx immigrants to bring some of these practices up right into the Midwest. On the other hand, we did include the kind of livestock and plant integration as a model or a marker of regenerative practices. And our view is, my personal view is that I think livestock and poultry have an important role to play in terms of providing the kind of enriched and healthy soils. And I think that's a lot of the damage has come from conventional or more industrial practices, has been that separating out and basically rejecting the notion that nature can often offer a lot of these wonderful so-called ecosystem services, and they don't on largely so-called free. Although you have to help, put some money into protecting the local landscapes to allow nature to offer these services. But for the most part, what agribusiness is about is basically competing and or sees nature as a competition, because they want to be able to commoditize everything. So everything from fertilizers to pesticides, which nature can handle largely on its own, are basically monetized in a way that farmers have to buy them what a healthier landscape would provide on its own. So, it's a great question. Our study doesn't answer this specifically, but we do include livestock crop integration as a marker of regenerative ag.
So go ahead, Anne.
So if I can also say something, you almost have to look back, beginning 150, 175 years ago, just with the Euro-American concentration of agriculture, certainly coming across into the Midwest. I mean, most farms at that point in time, moving forward until basically, the 1940s or 50s, were extremely diversified. There was timber to cut for heating your home. Chickens were raised, cattle. I mean, the farmer actually had a diverse landscape that he could actually use to make his farm profitable for him, or at least break even. And so the farms were diversified. And then, of course, things happen after the course of his recent history, World War II, et cetera. the industrial movement of agriculture, and it flows into just what Rob said. The other thing that I want to kind of mention is, and a lot of your colleges and universities, I'll just say Iowa State University because I'm obviously here in Iowa. Right now they're experimenting with prairie grasses in between the corn rows and measuring out those corn rows with prairie grass plantings, again, for nutrient input into the soil. A lot of other practices are going to be going on. Iowa, of course, being Iowa, but an agricultural state, but they are seeing more cover crops being utilized on the landscape, which is dropping in nutrient into the soil. I can drive from Des Moines to my farm location right on Interstate 80 and see, a lot more fields using the cover crops. So that's a practice. And, again, I was favored in knowing that Iowa State, was looking at some of their science field farms are using prairie grasses in between the rows and seeing how that might, drop in nutrient into the soil.
Well, I did notice looking at the figures and maps that it does seem like there is kind of a disconnect. Would you say that most farmers in the Midwest are doing either animals or crops? Because it doesn't seem like, it seems like the people who are integrating these two things are the minority. Luke wants to answer that question.
Well, I just wanted to say that that's a very relevant question for future work and for the other level of this study. But what we were able to look at in this study was much more at the level of the county and whether the county had both of those in the county and the extent to which that was kind of a, as you might say, a landscape mosaic where there could be some benefits from, or harms, who knows, from having those sorts of operations next to each other or perhaps on the same farm, but we just can't differentiate between where within the county these different activities do or don't happen in this study. Just it's from the nature of the data that we were using, it's hard to get consistent data for every county in the Midwest. So there's some limits to what you can do. And I wish we were able to answer that question with this study, but I'm happy to say that we and others can answer it perhaps a bit better soon with these other farmer level sorts of and farm level inquiries.
Right. So what Luke brings up is the things that we aren't able to capture with the data we have. But I think what's really remarkable about our study is what it does capture, and that the county level analysis actually encourages a kind of community-wide interventions. We saw livestock diversity at the county level and crop diversity at the county level as being county measures are as markers of resources. So, for instance, if a county was entirely dedicated to just doing hog production, and the hog economy actually, we don't need to actually see the slide, but this, if the hog county actually, if the hog market goes south, as it were, what is that county going to do in terms of bringing revenue in for the local community? So if a county has a lot of livestock diversity and hog goes south, then perhaps a cattle or poultry can fill in for that and still bring revenue in to have revenue circulate in the county. And same thing with crops. So the notion of diversity can be certainly found at the level of the farm, and of course that's been a lot of focus of a lot of regenerative practitioners. But we want to kind of expand that notion of diversity beyond merely the farm gate and into the small area and county-wide level thing, because we believe that it's when communities start to integrate together in terms of their agricultural practices, it's when the real benefits of regenerative ag start to come in.
And could you all did a great job of listing out in the paper the various regenerative agriculture practices that you were looking at, and you defined them really well, and you also listed their benefits and linked to multiple scientific papers that showed the benefits on a lot of different levels of these regenerative ag practices. So keeping with this discussion of the integration of crops and livestock, you did survey some practices that do integrate crops and livestock. So what were some of those practices and how did they function on a farm?
That's a good question. There's so many variables that I have to look that up again.
I can prompt you. I know.
Yeah, help. Our own paper, right?
Pasture. What is silvopasture?
Right. Well, silvopasture, largely, you can grow crops under trees. So you can, have trees and still be able to grow other crops underneath, or you can, if you want to do, you can also integrate poultry underneath there. So there are ways and means by which different plants can help each other out in terms of the soil health, and some crops are very good at growing under shade. So that's largely silvopasture.
And any other practices that you all want to mention that speak to the integration of crops and livestock? Because one thing I noticed is that, so I think one answer to the question was that we're seeing the row crop farmers use cover crops and, crop diversity and rotations and that sort of thing, to make their crops more diverse. But those same counties where you saw a lot of that happening, you didn't see a lot of livestock type regenerative agriculture in those counties. So it did seem to speak to this. The map did seem to show to me that there was a separation, even at the county level, between regions that were primarily cropping and regions that were primarily doing animal agriculture, and that those things weren't well integrated. And even, when you look at the plains area of the maps versus the forested areas of the map. So it's a forested area up by the Great Lakes. And then when you get further from the Great Lakes on the western edge, that's a plains area. And you see lots of intensive grazing over in the plains area, which makes sense. And then you don't see a lot of grazing practices in the areas that are forested. And of course, that just totally makes sense. It's not an issue about, well, it's less regenerative because you're not seeing these types of things there. But so it's partly just the ecology of the region, but it is partly about how the industry grows up around that ecology, and then it kind of gets baked in, and you're not seeing as much diversity around that. So I have a meta question for you in terms of the data you all have collected based on Solar Tony's comment here. And he's saying, we need a coherent, well thought out plan to begin deconsumerism, to eliminate trash in the throwaway society, to transition to an eco-sustainable society, to eliminate fossil fuels, synthetic pesticides and chemicals, GMOs and plastics, to take care of soil, air, water, food, the earth, rivers, oceans, plants, and animals. I think that pretty much covers it in terms of sustainability goals that we might have. So how does your mapping of regenerative agriculture practices tell you where in the Midwest this seems doable, where it might not, and what sort of policies could we get the biggest bang for our buck in promoting in different areas of the Midwest to put us on this path? And is it possible overall? Do you see, is that just rhetoric, or is this a coherent plan and goal that you see as possible in the Midwest?
If it's all right, I'll start first on this. I'll just say that I'm all with you, Solar Tony. I hear where you're coming from, and it would be a beautiful thing to arrive in a world where agriculture is treated as a natural economy again. Where when we think of agriculture, we think of the soil, we think of water, we think of air, we think of healthy communities, and that is very much the objective of our organization and our research study. But at the same time, though, we are largely the Midwest historically has been the the source of some of the most devastating industrial practices in agriculture that were subsequently exported as a model of production around the world. So there's the dream, and then there's the reality of where we are. And then the question is, how do we go from the reality to the wonderful dream? And I see that as a new reality of how do we get to a way in which agriculture is treated as part and a source of human health and well-being. And the fact is, it's a journey, and it's a generational journey. And we unfortunately, in many ways, time is running out. The water table's in decline. The soils are going to the pot, as it were. And so, how do we get out of this? And it's not merely a matter. Some of it is, the logistics of moving out of one food system into another in such a way that farmers aren't just destroyed economically. So that's the reality of it. And then we have to see, how do we allow farmers to transition in a way that they can still pay their bills? And how do we do so? And this is a broader question, and this is a question for Regeneration Midwest, is how do we do so in a context in which agribusiness has a very strong, is a strong political force, as much as the pharmaceutical industry or weapons industry here in the United States. How do we do that? And that requires organizing. And so there's hard work to go from the realities of where we are to the wonderful dream that Solar Tony provided for us in terms of getting to a place where agriculture is treated much more so-called humanely. And that is the hard work. That is the work that's going to require for us all to roll up our sleeves for the next several decades to actually make a dent and move in that direction. And that is requires figuring out a lot of details of logistics of how do we help farmers make the transition? How do we make communities at the county level make this transition? How do we do so in the face of a political system that, in essence, favors refusing that journey?
Go ahead, Luke.
Well, I don't have a great answer for the large political questions necessarily here, although I think they're extremely urgent. But I will say that just with respect to some of the things you can do with what we've learned, the USDA created something called the farm resource regions. And that's a way of dividing up the country into different agricultural regions that have something similar to, again, like what we did with our little regions. They made their own effort. This was a few decades ago, and this kind of work was quite popular actually in the beginning of the 20th century, but there hasn't been a lot of that work done recently. And something that none of this work has really taken into account would be doing it with an eye towards regenerative agriculture and various sorts of more sustainable transitions for agriculture. So what our work does do is show both people interested in working in their own region, what other parts of the region they may be more directly working in similar ways with, and then other regions nearby, perhaps other areas nearby where they could go and establish some connections and engage in a bit of farmer to farmer and community to community mutual aid, learning, and organization. And it kind of gives you just a different sense of the lay of the land, different than just what you might get if you looked at a map of the landforms and the ecology. So yes, there are these areas that are largely forested at the moment and areas that are in the plains at the moment. But when you look at it from this regenerative agriculture perspective, you see that there's a kind of different story than you might have expected. And as such, there's new opportunities to make alliances and to learn across difference than there might have been. And, even for states that are charged with administering some of these policies, some of which you might like, some of which you might want to change, some of what they do is via what they can see, right? And so if they see differently and you can help them see differently, some of those policies might change a bit. So, that's a little bit of what I see we can contribute through these maps. Just a different point of view than people had been taking when they mapped this stuff before. And it's not all just the landform as it was. It's certainly that influences things. History matters, ecology matters, the soil, the geology, they all matter. But the story is still a bit unwritten, I think. And I think these maps also show that we don't really know where we're going to end up. And we have to kind of make that, not entirely of our own, in a world of our own choosing, but there are a lot of possibilities out there, I think, more than I had appreciated, at least. Thanks.
Okay, and just to keep elaborating and in making that change in vision, and looking at things, that's where we also need to broaden the scope and look, okay, what are the health impacts? How can we mitigate the impacts of climate change? To make a further point, to change the route the things are going now to the way we might have some future, as opposed to the one where the future might not exist at all. I think there is plenty of potential for restoration, like in the sense of an ecological restoration and to recover and to make things functional as they used to be. And definitely, I think the other thing is like being clear that that's probably that the planet or the Midwest is a place where we're going to stay, that there is no magic trip to Mars or everywhere in the galaxy where we'll find a new place to destroy, somehow that also needs to get into the vision. And again, this paper is just one of the first stages, but for example, to make the further point, we're looking at impacts on health, diseases that are related to this kind of production or to these types of agriculture, and also the thing of the response to climate change, like how does these things impact on how can we mitigate the negative impacts of climate change.
Annie, you want to wrap us up on this topic? I can provoke you a little bit by asking you what you think of people like Bill Gates, who say, well, we've got all these problems with factory farms. Why don't we just eliminate agriculture for animals and start making our food in a lab? We could just 3D print our meat. Wouldn't that be better for the environment?
I'm familiar, Alexis, with what you're talking about. I've not obviously read in depth Bill Gates, but I am familiar about this particular topic. One of the things I have heard is that the nutritional value of that particular food isn't quite the quality of what it would be if you worked with a healthy soil environment. So it's kind of like you're trading one problem for another. So if people aren't getting healthy food, then you have, disease, you have just a number of health issues. And it still doesn't accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in the long run. So one of the words I always like to throw into the mix of a conversation is balance. There needs to be a balance, a healthy balance, right and left balance. And this also means, the health of your food, the health of the soil. It's not an easy fix, but I think it's a journey to try to solve the problems. I certainly don't have a word or a sentence that's going to make the world better after we're done with this interview, but I think it's important that everyone take responsibility for doing the right thing. Whether you're a consumer, a producer, whatever it might be. We live on a tiny planet, and it's our responsibility. It's our home, and we need to take care of it. And I'm just going to kind of use that just as general phraseology because I can't use the fancy scientific words. I'm not good at that, but it's our responsibility to take care of the planet. Everyone's.
Absolutely. Well, I want to let you go, but I have a couple of burning questions related to current events. And, maybe it's not relevant for what you want to discuss here, but just throwing it out there, the H5N1 bird flu and the USDA is testing farms via PCR test. If they find H5N1 on a farm, all the birds are culled. So what regions in the Midwest, like where is in the Midwest, based on your research, Where is this going to impact? Which counties, which regions in the Midwest are going to be most impacted by this? And if you have any other thoughts about the whole situation.
I don't mean to steal the show here, but just recently, I would say within the last 5 to 7 days, there was like 1.2 million birds in Iowa that they had to kill because of the Asian flu. And then apparently that particular wealthy farm owner, after his staff killed all the birds for him, he fired them. They had no need to be at the farm because, well, they killed all the birds. So that was a recent story that was just here in Iowa.
I'll just add here that I wrote a book called Big Farms Make Big Flu, so I have a certain vantage point about how this is all coming about. And in that book, I described the 2015 outbreak of H5N2 across the Midwest. And other than that, more wild birds are being hit this round. It's largely a replay. This outbreak here in 2022, it's largely the industrial poultry that are getting hit worst here in Minnesota. It's through Turkey Alley, what I call Turkey Alley, down through the southeastern part of the state. And those counties that have the most industrial turkey are the ones getting hit hardest. I would say that agribusiness does do a lot of efforts to try to blame everyone else but their industrial model. So there's a lot of focus on where H5N1 emerged from, although it's largely, in all likelihood, it came in from Europe, which has been devastated the last 5 years from H5NX. And then since spread, there's a really attempt to blame wild birds on moving the virus from one part of this country to the other. But as with the 2015, industrial production have these long lines of supply chains, and a lot of industrial poultry is concentrated in certain parts of the state over others in such a way that one barn gets hit, the entire barn's devastated, and then the virus spreads either through moving poultry from one part of the county to the next, or one part of the state to the next, or by the virus floating on particles on the wind from one barn to the other. So we've really reached a point where the viruses are evolving out from underneath the biosecurity models that the industrial production is claiming are enough to protect it. And there's no discussion so far about how packing in 15,000 turkey that are all genetically the same may not be the most biosecure way of controlling a virus. And this is the kind of stuff that, in my view, would be better handled by counties that have great biodiversity in terms of its livestock and its crops, in such a way that presents the kind of mosaic landscapes that makes things very difficult for pests and pathogens to solve. And so if we engage in just the very regenerative practices that some counties are already doing, and we're more likely to move in a direction of protecting ourselves from the emergence and spread of these deadly pathogens.
I would love to agree with you, Rob, and I did, I think, until I saw the USDA data where they're testing backyard flocks as well. And they're saying they have like 200 something flocks that were industrial and like more than 100 that were backyard flocks. So it doesn't seem like, who knows? Like the test might be extremely sensitive. We don't see, doesn't seem to be evidence that the bird flu is actually killing the poultry. They're just exterminating the poultry based on the positive tests. And there might be, other policy issues. But I'm not sure that based on the data, we can say for sure that just, putting the birds outside means that they won't carry flus. They might just carry flus. It might be what they do. And it might be that we're having like a kind of an overreaction on the policymaking side to something that may have been just ongoing and might not have the harm might not be the flu itself. It might be the policies related to it. But that's just my opinion. And I'd like to move to Luke and Louise to see if you all have thoughts on on what's going on with the bird flu based on what your research tells you about who's going to be impacted and where this might go from here?
Well, I wish I had thoughts on this yet. I have been involved with a bit of work about these issues in collaboration with Rob in the past, but we haven't really had much of a chance to look at some of this data, although I would certainly like to do so in the future. I'm sure Rob has, but I have yet to fully wrap my head around a bunch of these issues. So have been looking at it a little bit recently, yes. Wish I had more to do.
As a dumb question, though, like, I mean, obviously, Anne told us the story from what happened in Iowa. Is Iowa the only place that's going to be impacted by bird flu, or is this going to impact like other areas in the Midwest?
Well, it's just already hit a bunch of areas in the Midwest and across the United States. I mean, it's much more in the 2015, it was much more concentrated in the Midwest, but it's actually gone starting from the East Coast, spreading out through the Midwest and beyond. And I would say, I want to be very clear, though, the notion that this is some harmless virus that is subjected to an overreaction is mistaken. This is a highly pathogenic avian influenza, meaning it's a deadly influenza. And one does not want to quibble with a virus that can not only clear out an entire barn of 250,000 layers, but can spread from barn to barn and, yes, spill over into backyard flocks. I mean, here's where 2015 and 2022 differ. What was remarkable about 2015, it was almost entirely concentrated on industrial production. That is not normally the case. You know, you look at H5N1 outbreaks across the world since the turn of the century, or any of the highly pathogenic avian influenzas, it usually hits an industrial barn and then spreads out into backyard flocks, whereupon the agribusiness then blames the small farmers for the spread of the virus because they didn't pack them into biosecure barns. So that's the conflict that was often the case. In this case, this H5N1 is beginning to spread out into local flocks. But if you look at, for instance, the lists of outbreaks here in Minnesota, there's been only one or two backyard flocks that were hit, and almost the entirety of the concentration of outbreaks were in industrial turkeys throughout the southeastern Minnesota. So one, I would very much take this seriously. Two, yes, I would very much cull the birds that are infected with this, not only because it could spread through the entire supply chain, both industrial production and backyard, but in addition, there's always the risk that this is the avian influenza that actually spills over and goes human to human. And I think the last couple of years have told us that we don't want something like that.
Just to complement a bit what everyone has said, there is the issue. Again, the big issue here is the disproportionate blaming on the backyard flocks. Because if you read the news or whatever, and I mean, it's always, oh, the problem is the backyard flocks, we need to eliminate them. But again, here is where the type of research we did, as Luke said, might help to change the way we think about things, no? Because if we, I mean, as some people put the solution on, oh, we should create and have lab-grown meat, not having more animals in the middle, we can also put the counter argument, okay, if for ages what worked was to have backyard birds, how can we do to ensure that that works and keeps working? And actually, how can we engage that type of production, for example, on a diversified system, where if a farmer has his birds infected and they need to be cool, it's not like a total loss. It's not a ruin. He has a different resource upon which he or she can depend and move ahead, no? And that's a big mentality change we need to know to have, and actually question this type of assertion. So the problem is the backyard flocks. Like, who is saying that? Who is the thing? And think on the type of research we did, showing that, okay, these are actually the things we need to look for. How can we do, and what kind of research can help us to keep that going and to make it functional? And actually, how can we demonstrate that the diverse system actually has the economic benefit, but also has all the other benefits that tend to get ignored when people want just to have a silver bullet or a magical solution like, oh, let's grow the meat in a lab on a container on a fermenter.
All right, so we've gone over an hour, so I feel that we should wrap up. But I'll give the floor to each of you to say anything you'd like that maybe didn't get brought up today, or that you think is a good topic for future conversations. Let's start with Anne.
Well, I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you so much for allowing us to present our paper and our team. It's certainly been a wonderful experience for us to learn as we have for the past 2.5, going on close to 3 years, actually. So again, we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our project and our program and our discoveries to date. I don't really have anything more to say than what I just previously said. It is all our responsibility for taking care of the earth. I've had other scientists actually say, the earth will take care of itself. Not coming out of my mouth, but that was interesting to kind of make a note of. But I think it's our responsibility, and please don't litter. I want to say that to the public. Please don't litter. This is our home. Let's keep it clean. So thank you again.
Thank you, Anne. How about Luis?
Well, what I would like to emphasize or to add is the thing that, again, we were talking today about regenerative agriculture as it's related to food production, what we eat, where does it come from, and the things, but we actually need also to think on the other implications. What's the impacts, or what are the associations of these types of agriculture, for example, with the health of the people living locally where it's practiced, and what are the climate change implications? How a type of agriculture can help us to stop climate change, to mitigate the impacts. Naturally, how these things can improve overall health and well-being of the people. That's like, and that's what will be great also, like to see in agencies, like the USDA or whatever, or whomever is concerned. Okay, we want you guys, the researcher, addressing this type of questions. This will be helpful for us to do what we do.
Agreed. And Luke?
Well, I suppose this is a bit of a geographer's comment here, but we've spoken a lot of words, but there are a lot of maps and images in what we've done. And if you want a better sense of what it is we were doing and what it means, please do take a look at that link that we've posted. And you might be, many of us are using maps these days to figure out where we're going on a day-to-day basis. But I think some of these maps are also useful in figuring out where we're going more collectively, and what sorts of, as I said before, what sorts of alliances we might not have thought of that we can make to move forward into that future together. So I don't know how much looking at maps really helps you get there, but hey, some of them look pretty, I think. So, take a look. Don't just listen to us, Yak. Thanks.
And Rob, I won't pigeonhole you here. You can talk about anything you like, but one last question that I wanted to pick up from the chat was, this is Regeneration Midwest, the Midwest Healthy Ag Project. And someone asked, well, what about California? So Rob, in your closing statements, please also include a little bit about how Midwest Healthy Ag got started in terms of what other people could do, because this was really a farmer-generated project. The farmers got together, they saw these research needs, you all ended up applying for grants. Could that be done in other parts of the country? And I just would like to make a pitch for this. Maybe I'm answering the question myself, I apologize. But Regeneration International really does want to use Regeneration Midwest and the Midwest Healthy Ag Project as an example of what one region did, and encourage other regions to do similar things, to get the people power together, and then get scientific, get the evidence that you need to support your policy positions. So now you get the last word, Rob. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you very much, Alexis, and thanks to Corey for both of you for hosting us today. It's been a wonderful time, and these kind of conversations are really lovely and necessary. So, and we hope to have some more in the future. And this is very much the end, as Anne brought up, this is the end of our phase 1 in terms of our analysis. And as Luis brought up, we're moving toward a phase 2 with connecting these kind of agricultural production and where things are happening to the kind of climate change impacts and population health impacts that we want to see and map out and explore. But it's exactly what I was going to end up here, Alexis. I was going to point out that very much that this is not just a bunch of eggheads like myself, doing this analysis, right? This is very much a farmer-initiated project, and farmers and food activists have been involved in the project right from the start. The variables that we choose for the index was ongoing conversation of many weeks among people from different background, different expertise, to converge and think on how we might map this out. And I assure you, it's certainly changed my notion of what science can be. It's not just out of the kind of R1 research-heavy universities. A lot of good work's being done there, but this is more of a science for the people. And this is very much in the direction of the people most affected by the impacts of decisions about farming, taking the banner and just saying, hey, this is the direction we want to go in terms of making decisions about how to figure out what to do with our communities. And I think it's been an enormously productive and enlightening and illuminating and delightful experience for all of us to work together in ways that we haven't worked before. So, but it takes a lot of practice too for people with different languages and expertise to get together and sit around a table and week after week for years on end, work through a lot of this. And it's hard work, but for us, we find it's been very helpful, and we hope it's been very helpful for you, and to take up Luke's invitation to look through these maps and think through. Again, it's not the final word. It's very much the starting of a conversation for what is a generational project, which is to move the Midwest into a direction of much better agricultural production, much better for people, for the land, for wild animals, for our water, for the health and well-being of local communities. And yeah, this most definitely can be done elsewhere throughout the country. I mean, there's efforts in the Southwest to start this kind of work. California, I think there were posted in the comments links to a couple papers or titles of a couple papers of work that has done more national level kind of work that you can start with. But, our notion, let 1,000 flowers bloom, let people from across the country come together and think through what's best for the community. What works as regenerative ag here in the Midwest may not count as regenerative ag elsewhere. So let's take the geographer's lead on this and think through that different places have different needs and different definitions, and work your way through what's best for your community. And we entirely are 100% behind Regeneration International's efforts to use this project as an example and a source of inspiration for all of us, both here in the United States and abroad and the rest of the world, to bring about an agriculture that can continue to feed people for many generations and in a way that provides nutritious food and all sorts of lovely bounties that make life worth living. So I think, our project is only a little stepping stone for this, and there's a lot of work being done out there, and we're just happy to be able to contribute in that direction.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Anne. Thanks, everybody who shared this time with us. And we will definitely bring the Midwest Healthy Ag team back. This is the second conversation we've had with you all, and we're going to do it again. I look forward to seeing what you all do next. Thanks for everything.